My name is Tori. I am 27 years old, and 3 days before my life split into a before and an after, I still believed that no matter how broken a family is, blood means something. I was wrong. The night of the accident was ordinary, almost boring. Rain fell in thin silver lines across my windshield. The road was dark, slick, and quiet. I remember thinking about nothing important, just small things, like what I would eat when I got home. Then headlights appeared. Too bright. Too close. A truck lost control. Tires screamed. Metal twisted. And in the space between one heartbeat and the next, everything went black. There was no pain. No fear. Just silence. When I later tried to remember it, the darkness felt peaceful. Almost gentle. As if the world had placed me on pause. But while I drifted somewhere between life and death, something else was happening in a brightly lit hospital office. My father was sitting across from a surgeon. And he was not crying. He was calculating. I did not hear the words when they were spoken. I was unconscious, machines breathing for me, wires tracking every fragile signal my body still produced. My heart struggled. My brain was swollen. The doctor said I needed immediate surgery. There was a chance I would survive. There was also a chance I would not. The procedure was expensive. Recovery would take time. There could be long-term complications. To my father, those were not medical risks. They were financial ones. Let her go, he told the doctor. We are not paying for the surgery. Then he signed the Do Not Resuscitate order. Ink on paper. Quick. Clean. Final. 3 days later, I woke up. The first thing I felt was weight. My limbs were heavy. My mouth was dry. The room smelled like disinfectant and quiet desperation. Machines hummed beside me, steady and indifferent. I blinked slowly, trying to understand why everything felt distant, like I was looking at the world through thick glass. A nurse noticed I was awake. She had tired eyes. Kind ones. You are very lucky, she whispered. Lucky. That word would have been funny if I had the strength to laugh. It took hours before I was strong enough to ask questions. My voice barely worked. My thoughts moved slowly, like they were walking through mud. Where is my father? I asked. The nurse hesitated. That was the first crack. She looked down at her hands. Then back at me. Something inside her seemed to struggle. Your surgery, she began carefully. There was a discussion. I felt something cold move through my chest. What discussion? I asked. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Uncomfortable. He did not approve it at first, she said quietly. At first. 2 small words. But they changed everything. The hospital ethics board intervened. A different doctor pushed back. Someone argued that I was young, that my chances were strong enough to justify the risk. The delay nearly cost me my life. But they operated anyway. Without his financial commitment. Without his support. I survived because strangers believed I was worth saving. Not my own father. I stared at the ceiling after she left. White tiles. Small cracks. A faint buzzing light. No tears came. I expected anger. I expected heartbreak. Instead, I felt something colder than both. Clarity. My relationship with my father had never been warm. He was a powerful businessman, respected, feared, admired. At home, he was distant. Everything was measured. Time. Attention. Money. I always felt like a line item on a spreadsheet. An expense. A responsibility he tolerated. Still, I believed that if my life were truly at risk, something human would awaken inside him. Some instinct. Some love. Instead, he chose savings over surgery. Cost over daughter. And the worst part was not the decision itself. It was how easy it had been for him. When he finally came to the hospital, 2 days after I woke up, he stood at the foot of my bed like a visitor in a stranger's room. No tears. No apology. Only discomfort. "You look better," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. I studied his face carefully. There was no guilt there. Only irritation. As if my survival had complicated something for him. In that moment, something inside me settled into place. Revenge is not born from rage. It is born from realization. And I realized that my father did not see me as a daughter. He saw me as a liability that refused to disappear. He believed his decision would fade into silence. That I would never know. That consequences could be avoided with enough money and influence. He underestimated one thing. I survived. And survival changes people. As I lay there, weak but fully aware, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not confront him with dramatic accusations. No. I would learn. I would observe. And when the time came, I would show him exactly how expensive a signature can become. This was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of his collapse. Recovery is a strange thing. Your body heals in silence. Bones mend. Bruises fade. Stitches dissolve. Nurses smile and tell you that you are improving. But no one talks about what happens to the mind. While my muscles grew stronger, something sharper was forming inside me. Not anger. Not hatred. Something far more controlled. Focus. My father believed the hospital room was the end of the story. He thought his signature would remain buried in paperwork, hidden behind legal language and private conversations. He did not understand one simple truth. Silence does not mean forgiveness. From my hospital bed, I began to think about his world. The empire he had built over decades. Real estate, investments, partnerships, offshore accounts. He loved power more than anything. Power gave him respect. It gave him control. And control was his greatest weakness. I grew up watching him. Listening. Absorbing things he never meant to teach me. Late-night phone calls behind closed doors. Arguments about risk exposure. Quiet discussions about investors who trusted him blindly. He used to say, "Reputation is everything." He was right. And reputations can crack. The first step was patience. When I was discharged from the hospital, I did not go home. I rented a small apartment instead. He did not question it. Perhaps he was relieved. Distance made observation easier. I started reviewing everything I already knew. Public records. Company structures. Past deals. I did not need to invent lies. Lies collapse too easily. Truth, when placed carefully, is far more destructive. My father's empire looked solid from the outside. Clean. Successful. Untouchable. But inside, it was held together by confidence. Investor trust. Carefully maintained illusions. If doubt entered that system, even slightly, it would spread. And doubt costs nothing to create. The first move was small. I contacted one of his older investors. A cautious man who had once questioned a merger decision years ago. I remembered the tension in that meeting. My father had dismissed him aggressively. I sent a simple message. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just information. Timelines that did not align. Financial patterns that raised quiet questions. Legal gray areas that, when viewed closely, looked darker than gray. I did not accuse. I simply asked if he had ever noticed the same inconsistencies. Doubt is powerful because it grows on its own. Within hours, the investor responded. Curious. Concerned. Wanting clarification. And from there, it began. Phone calls multiplied. Meetings were scheduled. Internal audits that were once routine became urgent. My father, who was used to commanding rooms, suddenly found himself explaining instead of directing. The second move came the next day. I forwarded documented evidence of a shell company linked indirectly to one of his riskier deals. Not illegal on its own, but questionable enough to trigger discomfort. And discomfort spreads faster than truth. Within 48 hours, the atmosphere shifted. Investors began freezing temporary funds. Partners asked for written confirmations. Legal teams were pulled into emergency reviews. My father was no longer in control of the narrative. He tried to respond the only way he knew how. Aggression. Intimidation. Dismissal. But fear does not inspire loyalty. It exposes cracks. By the third day, rumors were circulating inside his own board. Words like liability. Exposure. Regulatory risk. The empire he built on confidence was trembling under uncertainty. And I did nothing dramatic. I did not scream. I did not threaten. I simply allowed the truth to breathe in rooms that had once been sealed. From my small apartment, I watched it unfold. News alerts. Financial whispers. A sudden drop in stock value. Emergency investor calls. 72 hours. That was all it took. 72 hours for suspicion to evolve into panic. Accounts were temporarily locked pending review. A major partner withdrew from a joint venture. Competitors sensed weakness and moved quickly. Power is fragile when it depends on perception. By the end of the third day, my father's tone had changed. Reports described him as tense. Defensive. Unusually reactive. The man who once priced my life like a business expense was now being evaluated by the same cold calculations. Risk versus reward. Liability versus asset. I did not celebrate. There was no joy in it. Only inevitability. I remembered him standing at the foot of my hospital bed, adjusting his cufflinks, speaking to me as if I were an inconvenience. "You look better," he had said. Now his empire did not. And the collapse had only just begun. He still believed he could fix it. That money could silence concern. That influence could delay consequences. He underestimated how quickly trust evaporates once fear enters the room. He underestimated me. By the end of that 72-hour window, financial paralysis had begun. Investors demanded withdrawals. Legal reviews escalated. Credit lines tightened. The empire was not destroyed yet. But it was bleeding. And for the first time in his life, my father was reacting instead of controlling. This was no longer about anger. It was about consequence. And consequences, once set in motion, do not ask permission to continue. By the fourth day, the panic was no longer private. It was visible. News outlets began circling the story. Financial blogs hinted at irregularities. Analysts who once praised my father's strategic genius suddenly used cautious language. Uncertainty. Exposure. Risk. Words he had used about others were now attached to his name. Inside his company, emergency meetings stretched late into the night. Legal teams scrambled, not to expand, not to acquire, but to protect what was left. Investors demanded full transparency. Some withdrew completely. Confidence, the invisible foundation of his empire, collapsed first. And once confidence disappears, everything else follows. Credit lines froze. Pending deals dissolved. Longtime partners distanced themselves, publicly and quickly. In less than 72 hours, the empire that took him 30 years to build was suffocating under its own weight. It was never as strong as it looked. It was held together by perception, leverage, and fear. When those dissolved, nothing remained. The official announcement came 2 days later. Financial protection filings. Temporary bankruptcy status. Asset reviews. The language was formal. Controlled. Carefully worded. But the meaning was simple. He had lost everything. I was sitting by my apartment window when I read the final confirmation. The sky outside was gray, almost the same shade as the hospital walls I had stared at days earlier. For a moment, I closed my eyes. I remembered the nurse's trembling voice. He did not approve it at first. I remembered the image of him signing that document. Quick. Clean. Detached. He had believed my life was a cost he could avoid. Now he was learning something far more painful. Avoiding responsibility has a price. That evening, he came to see me. Not at the hospital. At my apartment. He looked different. Smaller. His posture was no longer sharp and confident. His eyes carried exhaustion instead of authority. The expensive suit remained, but it looked like armor that had failed. For the first time in my life, he did not look powerful. He looked uncertain. We stood in silence for several seconds. "You knew," he said finally. It was not a question. I did not deny it. "I survived," I replied calmly. That was all. No dramatic speech. No raised voice. He searched my face, perhaps looking for guilt. Or remorse. Or cruelty. But revenge does not always look like rage. Sometimes it looks like balance. "You destroyed everything," he whispered. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "I removed what was already unstable." The truth settled between us, heavy and unavoidable. I had not created fraud. I had not invented corruption. I had not lied. I had simply exposed what he believed would stay hidden forever. He lowered himself into a chair, suddenly looking older than I had ever seen him. For the first time, there was something in his eyes that resembled realization. Not regret for his business. Regret for his decision. "You would have let me die," I said quietly. He did not answer. He did not need to. Silence confirmed it. And that silence changed everything more than any apology could. In that moment, I understood something important. Money can rebuild companies. It cannot rebuild trust. It cannot rewrite choices. It cannot erase a signature made in cold indifference. My father lost his empire in 72 hours. But he lost his daughter the moment he chose savings over surgery. I did not feel victorious. I felt finished. Revenge did not heal me. It did not erase the betrayal. It did not give me the father I once hoped existed. What it gave me was clarity. Some people believe power protects them from consequences. It does not. It only delays them. As he stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "I never thought you would survive," he admitted quietly. I looked at him, steady and unshaken. "That was your mistake," I said. When the door closed behind him, the room felt lighter. Not because he was gone. But because the truth no longer hid in shadows. If there is one thing my story proves, it is this. The most dangerous decisions are not the loud ones. They are the quiet signatures. The private conversations. The moments when someone believes no one will remember. I remembered. I survived. And survival gave me power he never expected. If this story made you think, if it made you question the silent choices people make when they believe they are untouchable, then stay with me. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction. It is consequence. And sometimes, the person you underestimate becomes the reason everything falls apart. If you believe actions always return to their owners, make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that prove one simple truth. No decision is ever truly silent.